The story of Kira Lejoy. Welcome, my viewers, to a truly devastating and shocking true crime story. Today, we delve into the tragic events of September 23rd at the Holy Cross Baptist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where a bride's dream wedding turned into a nightmare right at the altar.
On September 23rd at Holy Cross Baptist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a bride was stabbed to death at the altar in front of 50 guests, and the killer turned out to be the groom's mother. Kira Lejoy woke up in her old room on the second floor of her parents' house long before dawn. It was still dark outside, but she couldn't sleep anymore. Her heart was beating fast and loud, as if trying to escape from her chest. Today, she would become the wife of Darius Collins, the man she had loved for the past 5 years, the man for whom she was willing to do anything. She turned on her side and looked at the wedding dress hanging on the closet door. The snow-white silk shimmered softly in the pre-dawn twilight, and Kira felt a warm excitement spread through her. This was her day, the day she had dreamed of ever since Darius proposed to her last spring on the shore of the lake where they had kissed for the first time. Kira got out of bed and walked to the window. Tulsa was slowly waking up. The streets of their quiet neighborhood were empty, with only a few streetlights illuminating the neat lawns and tall oak trees. The LJO house was located in one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city, where wealthy African-American families had lived for several generations. Her father, Jerome, had built a transportation business from scratch, and her mother, Ruth, had turned a small grocery store into a chain of 12 locations across Oklahoma. They had given Kira everything: an education, stability, confidence in the future. But now, standing at the window and looking out at the empty street, Kira felt a strange uneasiness. It was as if something inside her knew that this day would not go as smoothly as she had hoped. She pushed the thought away and went to the bathroom. She had to get ready. Today, she had to be perfect. By 9 in the morning, the house was bustling with activity. Ruth Lejoy, an energetic 58-year-old woman with short hair and attentive brown eyes, was already giving orders downstairs, checking guest lists and calling the organizers. Her voice came from downstairs, clear and confident, and Kira smiled involuntarily. Her mother always knew how to keep everything under control. Tiana Reifraftoft, her best friend from college, burst into Kira's room. Tiana worked as a nurse at St. Francis Hospital and was always there for her at important moments. "Bride!" Tiana exclaimed,
Throwing the door wide open. "Are you ready for the most important day of your life?" Kira turned away from the mirror where she was fixing her hair and smiled. "I don't know. I think so, but I'm so nervous, Tiana. My hands have been shaking since this morning." Tiana walked over and hugged her friend around the shoulders. "That's normal. All brides are nervous. But you're marrying Darius, and he's the best man in the world. You're made for each other." Kira nodded, but something tightened inside her. Tiana didn't know. No one knew what had happened 10 years ago about that night that Kira had tried so hard to forget. "Let's try the dress on again," Tiana suggested, heading for the closet. "Your mother wants to make sure everything fits perfectly." Ruth came upstairs a few minutes later, carrying a tray with tea and toast. "Kira, sweetheart, you have to eat. The ceremony starts at 2, and you won't have time to eat later." Kira obediently took the toast, even though she didn't feel like eating at all. Her stomach was in knots from nervousness. Ruth sat down on the edge of the bed and looked closely at her daughter. "You look pale. Are you all right?" "Yes, Mom, I'm just nervous." Ruth smiled gently. "You know, I was nervous on my wedding day too. I thought I would trip on my way to the altar or forget my vows. But when I saw your father, all my fears disappeared. You'll see Darius and realize that everything is right." Kira nodded, trying to smile. Her mother had no idea that her daughter's nerves weren't about the ceremony. Tiana carefully took the dress off the hanger. "Let's try it on. I want to make sure all the seams are in place after the last fitting." Kira stood up and let her friend and mother help her into the dress. The silk felt cool against her skin, and when Tiana fastened the last button at the back, Kira turned to face the large mirror. She looked like a bride from a magazine. The dress fit her figure perfectly, emphasizing her waist and flowing smoothly to the floor. The neckline was modest, the sleeves long and elegant. Kira had always wanted a dress like this, elegant without excess. "You're beautiful," Ruth whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "My girl is getting married." Tiana hugged Kira from the side. "Darius will be speechless when he sees you." Kira looked at her reflection and tried to imagine herself walking down the aisle of the church, Darius waiting for her at the altar with his gentle smile. He was a good man, honest.
Gaze peered inside. "May I come in? May I? Dad!" Kira turned to him. Jerome entered and paused, looking at his daughter. "My God, Kira, you look—" He couldn't finish his sentence, and Ruth laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "Don't make me cry anymore, Jerome." Her father approached and gently kissed Kira on the forehead. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You've become a wonderful woman, and Darius is a good guy. He'll take good care of you." Kira hugged her father, feeling a lump rise in her throat. "Thank you, Dad." Jerome stepped back and looked at his wife. "Ruth, the phone is ringing downstairs. I think it's Eveina Collins. She wants to talk to Kira." Kira froze. "Eveina? Darius's mother." Ruth frowned. "Evelyn, now we saw each other yesterday at rehearsal. What does she want to talk about?" Jerome shrugged. "I don't know. She said it was important. She asked me to tell Kira to come to the phone." Kira felt her heart beat faster. Something was wrong. Eveina never called just to call, especially on the eve of the wedding. "I'll be right down," Kira said quietly. Tiana helped her out of her dress, and Kira threw on a robe. She went downstairs where the phone was lying on the table in the living room. Kira picked up the receiver with a trembling hand. "Hello?" "Kira, it's Eveina." The voice on the other end was cold and even. "I need to talk to you in person, now." "Eveina, we're getting ready for the wedding. Maybe it can wait until—" "No, it can't." Evelina's voice was steely. "This concerns tomorrow. It concerns you and my son. I'll be there in 15 minutes." And the line went dead. Kira slowly put down the phone. Her hands were shaking more than before. Eveina Collins arrived exactly 15 minutes later. Kira watched from the living room window as a black sedan pulled up in front of the house, and a tall woman in a strict dark blue suit got out. Evelyn always looked impeccable, not a hair out of place, her makeup perfect. She owned a chain of beauties throughout Tulsa and had a reputation as a tough businesswoman. But now there was something different about her gait. She walked slowly toward the house as if carrying a heavy load. Ruth opened the door and smiled warmly. "Evelyn, what a surprise! Please come in." Evelyn barely nodded in response. "Ruth, I need to talk to Kira alone." Ruth's smile became a little strained. "Of course. Kira, Evelina wants to talk to you." Kira left the living room, trying to remain calm. "Hello, Evelina." Evelina looked at her with a long, searching gaze. "Kira, can we go out into the garden? I need to talk to you face to face." Kira nodded, and they walked through the house to the back door leading to the garden. Ruth watched them with a concerned look, but did not ask any questions. The Lejoy garden was well kept and quiet. Tall trees provided shade, and flower beds filled the air with a sweet fragrance. Kira and Evelina walked to a small gazebo in the far corner of the yard where they could talk without fear of being overheard. Evelina stopped and turned to Kira. Her face was pale, and her eyes were filled with cold fury. "I found a diary," Evelina said without preamble. "The diary of my late husband, Terrence. I found it a week ago while sorting through things in the attic." Kira felt the ground slip away beneath her feet. A diary. Terrence kept a diary? I don't understand, she whispered, even though she understood perfectly well. Eveina took a step closer, her voice growing even colder. Don't pretend, Kira. In this diary,
Terrence described in detail what happened 10 years ago. He wrote about you, about how you met at a charity event, about how you flirted with him, about how you spent the night together in a hotel. Kira took a step back, feeling her cheeks burn. Evelyn, Shut up. Evelyn cut her off sharply. I read every word. Terrence described everything, every detail. He wrote about his shame, his guilt. He wrote that he couldn't look me in the eye, that he hated himself for what he had done. Tears welled up in Evelina's eyes, but her voice remained firm. My husband died 9 years ago. He died of a heart attack when he was only 54. The doctors talked about stress, about overwork, but now I know the truth. He died because of the guilt he felt, because he betrayed me, because of you, Kira. Kira covered her face with her hands. It was a mistake, a terrible, stupid mistake. I was 25 years old, young and foolish. I didn't know that you were destroying a marriage. Evelina spoke softly, but every word was like a blow, that you were destroying a man's life. Our families have been friends for decades, Kira. I trusted you. I watched you grow up, and you slept with my husband? Kira dropped her hands. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I didn't mean to hurt you. It happened once. Just once. We both knew right away that it was terrible. Terrence said we would never... Enough, Evelina interrupted her. I don't need your excuses. I came here to tell you one thing. Cancel the wedding immediately. Today. Kira froze. What? You will not marry my son. I will never, do you hear me? Never accept into my family a woman who slept with my husband. You are a traitor. You are a destroyer, and I will not allow you to enter the Collins house. Kira shook her head. Evelyn, please, I love Darius. I love him more than anything in the world. What happened with Terrence, that was so long ago. I've changed. I'm not the girl I was 10 years ago. You're still the same, Evelina replied coldly. You're a liar and I won't let you ruin my son's life the way you ruined mine and then my husband's. Darius has a right to know, Kira said quietly. He has a right to decide for himself. You want to tell him. Evelina's voice was filled with contempt. You want to break his heart on the eve of his wedding? Or are you hoping that I'll keep quiet and you'll get married without any problems, and I'll be forced to smile and pretend that I don't know anything? Kira clenched her fists. I can't call off the wedding. Darius is all I have. He's giving me a chance at happiness. I can't lose him because of a mistake I made 10 years ago. Evelina stepped so close to her that Kira could feel her breath. Then I'll do everything I can to stop this marriage, whatever it takes. You'll regret not listening to me. With that, Evelina turned and quickly walked toward the garden exit. Kira remained standing in the gazebo, trembling all over. When Kira returned to the house, Ruth and Tiana immediately noticed her condition. Kira, what's wrong? Ruth approached her daughter and took her hands. You're pale. What did Evelina want to talk about? Kira tried to smile, but her lips trembled. Nothing important, just some final details before the wedding. Tiana frowned. Kira, you look like you've seen a ghost. What did she say to you? Really, everything's fine. Just nerves. Ruth didn't look convinced, but she didn't insist. Okay, then let's go upstairs. We still need to discuss your hair and makeup. The stylist will be here in an hour. Kira obediently went up to her room, but inside she was burning with rage. Evelina's words echoed in her head over and over again. I'll do everything I can to stop this marriage, whatever it takes. You'll regret not listening to me. What did she mean? What was she going to do? The rest of the day passed in a fog. Kira mechanically answered her mother and Tiana's questions, nodding when asked to try something on or give her approval. But her thoughts were far away. In the evening, when the house finally quieted down and everyone went to bed, Kira lay in the darkness of her room and stared at the ceiling. Sleep would not come. Every time she closed her eyes, Evelina's face appeared before her.
cold, full of hatred. Kira thought about Terrence about that night 10 years ago, when she was a young, foolish girl who thought that the attention of an older man was something special. Terrence was charming and successful. He flirted with her at a charity event and she responded. They drank too much wine and what happened, happened. In the morning, Terrence called her and said it was a mistake, that he loved his wife, that they should never see each other again. Kira,
Two, they never spoke of it again. A year later, Terrence died. Kira went to his funeral. She saw Eveina standing by the coffin, crying. And Kira hated herself for what she had done. Now Eveina knew. And tomorrow at the wedding, she could tell Darius everything. She could ruin everything. Kira turned on her side and pressed the pillow to her chest. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't make a sound. She had to be strong. Tomorrow she would marry Darius, and no matter what happened, she would not let the past destroy their future. The morning of September 23rd was surprisingly clear and warm. The sun rose over Tulsa, bathing the city in soft golden light. The air was fresh with a hint of autumn, and the sky was cloudless and blue. It was a perfect day for a wedding. Holy Cross Baptist Church stood on the corner of 15th Street and Peoria Avenue, in the old part of town. It was a beautiful red brick building with a tall white steeple and wide steps leading up to the main entrance. The church was built in the early 20th century and had served as the spiritual center for Tulsa's African-American community for several generations. Kira's parents were married here, as were Darius's parents. By midday, guests began to gather in front of the church. Cars pulled up and elegantly dressed people stepped out. Women in bright dresses and hats, men in formal suits. Everyone was smiling, chatting, and exchanging greetings. The atmosphere was festive and joyful. About 50 people gathered at the church entrance, waiting for the ceremony to begin. They were relatives and friends of both families, colleagues, and old acquaintances. Many had known each other for decades. The Lejoy and Collins families were part of the same circle, the same community. At 10 to 2, a white limousine pulled up to the church. Jerome Lejoy was the first to step out, wearing an elegant dark gray suit. He walked around the car and opened the door, helping his wife out. Ruth looked gorgeous in a beige dress with a pearl necklace around her neck. Her face beamed with pride. Then Kira stepped out of the limousine. The guests fell silent, watching the bride with admiring glances. Her white wedding dress sparkled in the sun, her veil fluttering gently in the breeze. Kira held a small bouquet of white roses and looked stunningly beautiful. But those who knew her well could see the tension in her face, the paleness of her skin, the trembling of her hands. Tiana Raycroft, the bride's friend and maid of honor, immediately approached Kira. She was dressed in a soft pink bridesmaid's dress and carried her own small bouquet. "Kira, you look so beautiful," Tiana whispered, taking her friend's arm. "Everything will be fine. Breathe deeply." Kira nodded, but her eyes were full of anxiety. She scanned the guests, searching for one face among them. Eveina was not there yet. Ruth and Jerome began greeting the guests, smiling and hugging old friends. Ruth tried her best to look calm and happy, even though she had talked to her daughter late into the night trying to find out what had happened to Eveina. Kira didn't say anything, just kept repeating that everything was fine. But Ruth could see that her daughter was frightened, and that worried her. "Ruth, Jerome, congratulations." An elderly woman in a purple dress, Mrs. Delaney, the Lejoy's neighbor, approached them. "Kira looks like an angel. Darius is a lucky man." "Thank you, Gloria." Ruth smiled and hugged her neighbor. "We're so glad you came." Jerome stood next to his wife, greeting guests with firm handshakes. He remained calm, but his attentive gaze kept returning to his daughter. He also sensed that something was wrong. Kira stood at the foot of the steps leading to the church, and Tiana didn't leave her side. "Are you going to be okay?" Tiana asked quietly. "If you want, we can go inside and sit in the cool air." "No, I'll wait for Darius here," Kira replied. Her voice trembled. "He should be here any minute." Sure enough, a few moments later, a black SUV pulled up to the church.
Darius Collins got out. He looked magnificent in a black suit with a white shirt and silver tie. Darius was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a handsome face and a warm smile. When he saw Kira, his eyes lit up. He quickly crossed the space between the car and the church steps, ignoring the greetings of the guests. He needed to see his bride. "Kira," he whispered, stopping in front of her. "God, you're incredible. I can't believe you're going to be my wife." Kira felt tears welling up in her eyes. She stepped toward him and Darius embraced her, careful not to wrinkle her dress. "I love you so much," he whispered in her ear. "Are you ready for the most important day of our lives?" Kira nodded, burying her face in his shoulder. "I'm ready. Just keep me close." Darius pulled away and kissed her forehead. "Always." The guests watched the young couple with affection. Several women wiped away tears. Someone applauded quietly. But then another figure emerged from the SUV, Eveina Collins. She moved slowly, as if each step was difficult for her. She wore a strict dark blue dress, her hair pulled back into a tight bun. Evelina's face was pale, almost waxy, and her eyes were cold and determined. She clutched a black leather handbag in her hands. Kira saw her and froze. Darius followed the bride's gaze and turned to his mother. "Mom," he called, smiling, "come here. Look at Kira. Look it." But Eveina did not smile. She slowly approached the steps and stopped a few steps away from her son and his bride. Her gaze was fixed on Kira. The guests began to notice the tension. The conversations died down. Everyone turned to Eveina. "Mom, what's wrong?" Darius frowned. "You look pale. Are you feeling sick?" Evelyn slowly shook her head. Then she suddenly said loudly so that all the guests could hear, "Darius, Kira, I need to talk to you right now." There was such steel in her voice that Darius instinctively took a step back. "Mom, what are you talking about? The ceremony will start in a few minutes. We can talk later." "No," Eveina snapped, "we can't, because there won't be any ceremony." The guests froze. Several people gasped. Ruth and Jerome quickly approached the group. "Eveina, what are you saying?" Ruth tried to smile, but it came out strained. "You're scaring everyone." Eveina turned to Ruth, her eyes flashing with fury. "I'm telling the truth, Ruth. The truth that you and your daughter have been hiding from us all these years." "What truth?" Jerome stepped forward, his face darkening. "Evelyn, what's going on?" Evelyn took a deep breath and slowly scanned the assembled guests. 50 pairs of eyes looked at her expectantly. "A week ago,
"I was sorting through things in the attic," she began, loudly and clearly. "I found an old diary belonging to my late husband, Terrence. He kept it during the last years of his life, and in that diary I read something shocking." Darius shook his head. "Mom, what does Dad's diary have to do with anything?" "This is not the time for shut up and listen." Evelyn cut him off sharply, and Darius recoiled as if from a blow. His mother had never yelled at him like that before. Evelyn turned to Kira. Her voice was icy. "Terrence wrote about you in his diary, Kira. He wrote in detail about how 10 years ago, when you were 25, you met at a charity event, about how you flirted with him, about how you got drunk together, and about how you spent the night in a hotel together in the same bed." The silence was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Kira turned so pale that Tiana instinctively grabbed her arm, afraid her friend would fall. "What?" Darius whispered the word, as if he couldn't believe he had heard correctly. "What did you say?" Evelyn stared at the bride with a piercing gaze. "Your fiancé, Darius, slept with your father, with my husband 10 years ago. She was Terrence's mistress." The guests burst into whispers. Women covered their mouths with their hands. Men exchanged shocked glances. Someone started to speak aloud, but most just stood there, unable to move. "That's a lie." Ruth stepped forward, her voice trembling with indignation. "Evelyn, how dare you? How dare you slander my daughter on her wedding day?" "It's not slander," Evelyn replied coldly. "I have a diary. I can show it to all of you. Terrence described everything in detail, every meeting, every touch, every night." "Every night?" Jerome frowned. "You said it was one night." Evelyn smiled. One night, yes, but Terrence described it in such detail that I feel like I was there myself. He wrote about his guilt, his shame, about how he couldn't look me in the eye after that. Darius slowly turned to Kira. His face was pale, his eyes full of pain and disbelief. Kira, he whispered, tell me it's not true. Tell me my mother has lost her mind. Kira opened her mouth but couldn't say a word. Tears streamed down her cheeks, smudging her makeup. Kira, Darius repeated louder, answer me. But Kira remained silent. She stood there, trembling all over, unable to make herself speak. Tiana put her arms around her friend's shoulders. Darius, don't listen to her. Your mother is in shock after losing her husband. She doesn't know what she's saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Evelyn raised her voice. And I won't let this woman into my family. She's a traitor. She ruined my marriage. My husband died a year later, died of a heart attack because he couldn't live with the guilt. Ruth stepped forward toward Evelyn, her eyes burning with anger. Enough. Enough of this madness. Terrence died of heart disease from stress at work. It has nothing to do with my daughter. You're defending her because she's your daughter, Evelyn replied coldly. But I know the truth, and now everyone will know. Jerome stood between the two women. Evelyn, we've been friends for so many years. Our families have always been close. How can you do this? How can you try to destroy our children's happiness? I'm not trying to destroy their happiness. Evelyn looked at Jerome with cold contempt. I'm trying to save my son from a woman who lies and betrays.
From a woman who slept with his father. Darius took a step back, moving away from Kira. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. Mom, his voice was husked. Mom, do you really have that diary? Evelina nodded. Yes, it's at home in my bedroom. I can bring it right now if you want. You can read it yourself. Read what your father wrote about his relationship with this woman. Darius closed his eyes, his jaw tightened. The guests stood motionless. No one knew what to do or what to say. It was a wedding that had turned into a nightmare. Finally, Darius opened his eyes and turned sharply to his mother. Enough. His voice was loud and angry. Enough, Mom. Whatever you think, whatever you read in some diary, you have no right to do this here. Now, in front of us, in front of all our guests. Evelina tried to speak, but Darius didn't let her. You're disgracing our family. You're disgracing our father's memory. This is crazy, Mom. I don't know what's wrong with you, but this has to stop right now. He grabbed Kira's hand. The bride flinched, but didn't pull away. I love Kira, Darius continued, looking his mother straight in the eye. I love her, and I'm going to marry her today, right now, and nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing will stop me. He turned to Kira, his voice softening. Let's go. Let's go to the church. Kira looked at him with wide eyes full of tears. Darius, Not now, he said quietly. Whatever my mother says, we'll discuss it later in private, but right now we're going inside and getting married, okay? Kira nodded slowly. Darius squeezed her hand tightly and led her resolutely toward the church entrance. Tiana hurried after them. The guests hesitated, looking at each other. Then, one by one, they began to move toward the entrance. Some cast sympathetic glances at Evelina. Others looked at her with condemnation. Most simply didn't know where to look. Ruth and Jerome walked past Evelina without looking at her. Ruth held a handkerchief to her eyes, her shoulders shaking. Jerome put his arm around his wife's shoulders, his face grim. Evelina remained standing alone at the foot of the steps. The guests entered the church, avoiding her as if she were a leper. Her hands were shaking. The handbag she was clutching felt heavy. Evelina watched the backs of the people entering, and her face slowly contorted. Pain, rage, despair, all mixed together. She had warned Kira. She had given her a chance, but the girl had not listened, and now Evelina would do what she had to do. Slowly, as if overcoming invisible resistance, Evelina began to climb the steps of the church. She entered the cool twilight of the vestibule last when all the guests had already taken their seats on the benches. Inside, the church was beautiful and solemn. Tall stained glass windows let in multicolored light that fell on the wooden benches. At the altar stood a priest in white robes, ready to begin the ceremony. Darius and Kira took their places in front of him. Avalisa slowly walked down the side aisle and sat down on a bench in the front row on the right where the groom's family usually sat. She sat alone. No one sat down next to her.
Her hands continued to clench her purse. Inside, wrapped in a handkerchief, lay a small, sharp knife, the knife she had taken from the kitchen that morning. The priest raised his hands,
calling for silence, and began to speak. The ceremony began inside the Church of the Holy Cross. There was a tense silence. The guests sat on wooden benches, straightening their backs and trying not to look at each other. After the scene at the entrance, the atmosphere was heavy, as if the air had thickened and was pressing down on their shoulders. Some nervously adjusted their clothes. Some twirled the ceremony program in their hands, and some just stared straight ahead, not knowing where to look. The tall stained glass windows let in multicolored light that fell on the church floor in fanciful patterns. Candles burned at the altar, their flames swaying gently. The organ was silent. The organist did not dare to start playing after what everyone had heard outside. Kira and Darius stood at the altar. They were holding hands, but there was a distance between them that had not been there an hour ago. Kira was trembling all over. The white wedding dress that had seemed so beautiful that morning now hung on her like a dead weight. Her veil was askew, her makeup smeared from tears. Her eyes were red and full of fear. Darius stood next to her, squeezing her hand. He stood straight, his face tense. From time to time, he leaned toward Kira and whispered something in her ear. "Everything will be fine," he said quietly, but his voice trembled. "Just breathe. We'll get through this." Kira nodded but couldn't say a word. Her throat tightened with fear and guilt. She felt the guests' eyes on her, judgmental, curious, full of pity. But the worst was Eveina's gaze. The groom's mother sat in the front row on the right, alone on the entire bench. No one sat next to her, as if she were surrounded by an invisible wall. Eveina sat upright, her hands resting on her knees, and she never took her eyes off Kira. Her gaze was cold, full of hatred. A black leather handbag lay next to her on the bench, and Eveina touched it from time to time with her hand as if to check that it was still there. Kira's parents sat to the left of the altar. Ruth held a crumpled handkerchief in her hands and wiped her eyes. Her shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. Jerome hugged his wife, his face grim and tense. He glanced at Eveina several times, and those glances conveyed anger and incomprehension. Tiana sat next to Kira's parents, holding her bridesmaid's bouquet. She was crying too, but she tried to hold it together for her friend. The priest stood before the altar in white robes. He was an elderly man with gray hair and a kind face. Reverend Samuel Conincade, who had served at Holy Cross Church for 30 years. He had married many couples, baptized children, and buried the dead. But he had never seen anything like this. The priest cleared his throat and raised his hands, calling for silence. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Dear brothers and sisters, we are gathered here today to witness the union of two hearts before the Lord. Marriage is a sacred covenant that binds a man and a woman in love and fidelity." His words echoed throughout the church. The guests listened in silence, but many shifted uncomfortably in their pews, clearly feeling awkward. The priest continued to read the prayers and blessings, but even his experienced voice sounded uncertain. He paused several times as if forgetting his words, even though he had performed this ceremony hundreds of times. "The Lord created man and woman in his image," he said, "and blessed them to be together in joy and in sorrow, in wealth and in poverty, in health and in sickness." Kira listened to these words and felt her heart tighten. In joy and in sorrow, in health and in sickness. But what if their marriage began with a lie? What if Darius never forgave her for what she had hidden? The priest finished the prayer and turned to Darius. "Darius Collins, do you take Kira Lejoy to be your lawful wife? Do you promise to love her, honor her, support her, and remain faithful to her for the rest of your life. Darius took a deep breath.
His fingers tightened around Kira's hand. He looked into her eyes and said firmly, "I do." His voice was loud and confident, and several guests breathed a sigh of relief. The priest nodded and turned to Kira. "Kira Lejoy, do you take Darius Collins to be your lawful husband? Do you promise to love, honor, support, and remain faithful to him for the rest of your life?" Kira opened her mouth, but her voice caught in her throat. She looked at Darius, at his loving eyes, at his hand holding hers. Then her gaze involuntarily slipped to the front row, where Eveina was sitting. The groom's mother was staring at her with cold fury. "Kira?" the priest repeated softly. "Do you promise?" Kira blinked, forcing herself to focus. Tears filled her eyes again. Her voice trembled, "I promise." The words were so quiet that half the guests didn't even hear them. The priest frowned but nodded. "All right, then let's move on to the next part of the ceremony." He opened the Bible and began reading a passage from the Epistle to the Corinthians about love. His voice grew stronger, more confident. "Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not boast. It is not proud. It does not behave rudely. It does not seek its own. It is not easily provoked. It thinks no evil." Ruth sniffed in the front row on the left. Jerome hugged her tighter. The priest closed the Bible and looked at the congregation. "Now,"
He said solemnly, "if anyone here knows of a reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." The silence was absolute. Everyone froze. Darius and Kira stared straight at the priest, not daring to turn their heads. Suddenly, a sharp sound broke the silence. "I object." Eveina Collins jumped up from her pew. Her voice was loud, almost hysterical. All heads turned toward her. The priest froze with his mouth open. Darius closed his eyes and exhaled slowly.
"Mom," he began wearily, "please." But Eveina was already moving. She walked quickly down the center aisle toward the altar, clutching a black handbag in her hand. Her face was pale, almost insane. "This wedding must not take place," she shouted as she approached. "This woman is not worthy to be your wife, Darius." The guests began to stand up, turn around, and talk among themselves. Several men moved from the back rows toward the aisle as if to stop Eveina. Darius stepped toward his mother, holding out his arms. "Mom, what are you doing? Stop this madness!" But Eveina didn't stop. She walked around her son, quickly approached Kira, and suddenly her hand darted toward her purse. When her hand came back up, a sharp kitchen knife glinted in it. The women in the church screamed. Someone shouted, "She has a knife!" Eveina grabbed Kira by the shoulder, turned her toward her, and pressed the blade to the bride's throat. Kira screamed in fear. Her eyes widened, her breathing quickened. The cold steel pressed against her skin, and Kira felt an icy wave of terror roll down her spine. "Eveina, come to your senses!" Ruth jumped up from the bench and rushed forward, but Jerome grabbed her arm, holding her back. She couldn't get close while Eveina had a knife to her daughter's throat. Darius froze a step away from his mother and Kira. His hands were shaking, his face contorted with horror. "Mom, what are you doing? Let her go now!" Eveina pressed the knife harder. Kira felt the blade scratch her skin and moaned softly. "No," Eveina shouted. "I won't let her go until she tells the truth, until everyone hears what she's really like." The priest raised his hands,
Trying to calm the situation. "Eveina, please put the knife down. We can discuss everything calmly. There is no need for violence in God's house. She has defiled this house with her presence." Eveina turned to the congregation, still holding Kira. "She has defiled my marriage. She killed my husband." Tears streamed down Eveina's cheeks, but her hand with the knife did not tremble. Kira was choking with fear. Tears streamed down her face,
dripping onto her white dress. "Confess!" Eveina shouted right into her ear. "Tell them all the truth. You slept with my husband. Say it out loud." Kira sobbed, unable to speak. Her throat was constricted with horror. Darius took a step forward, reaching out his hand. "Mom, please let her go. I'm begging you. Let Kira go and we'll talk about anything. I'll listen to anything you want to say. Just let her go." But Eveina shook her head. "Only after she confesses in front of everyone. Only when everyone knows who she is." She pressed the knife even harder, and Kira felt a thin trickle of blood running down her neck. "Confess," Eveina repeated, "or I'll kill you right here." Kira choked back her sobs. Her legs buckled, her hands trembled. She couldn't keep silent any longer. She couldn't hide behind lies any longer. "It's true," she whispered. "Louder," Eveina ordered, "so everyone can hear." Kira closed her eyes and cried out in a breaking voice. "It's true. 10 years ago, I slept with Terrence. It was a mistake, a terrible, horrible mistake. Forgive me." The last words turned into sobs. The guests froze in shock. Several women covered their mouths with their hands. Someone began to sob. Darius recoiled as if he had been struck. His face turned pale. His eyes widened. He looked at Kira as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Kira, no." Ruth and Jerome froze in their seats, holding hands. Their faces expressed horror and disbelief. Eveina began to laugh. Her laughter was hysterical.
"Broken. See?" she shouted, turning to the guests. "That's who she is. A liar, a traitor, a who slept with another man's husband." She turned back to Kira, her face contorted with rage. "You ruined my marriage. My husband couldn't sleep at night because of his guilt. He died because of you. He died because he couldn't live with what he had done. And you were going to marry his son. How could you?" "I didn't want to," Kira sobbed. "I loved Darius. I wanted to start over." "You don't deserve to start over." Eveina was now screaming at the top of her lungs. "You deserve punishment. You deserve death for what you did to my family." And suddenly, Eveina's hand jerked. The knife plunged into Kira's chest. Kira gasped, her eyes widening in shock. She looked down at the knife handle sticking out of her body and couldn't believe her eyes. Eveina pulled out the knife and stabbed again and again and again. A stab to the chest, a stab to the stomach, a stab to the side. The church erupted in screams. Women shrieked. Men rushed forward. Ruth screamed her daughter's name. "No, no, Kira!" Darius rushed to his mother, trying to grab her hand with the knife. "Mom, stop! What are you doing? Stop!" But Eveina continued to stab. Her face was contorted with madness, and incoherent screams escaped her throat. The knife entered Kira's body again and again,
and her white dress was quickly covered with bright red stains. Kira fell to her knees, then onto her side. Blood spread across the marble floor of the altar and dripped down the steps. Her eyes were open, but she could no longer see anything. Jerome and 2 other men finally reached the altar. They grabbed Eveina by the arms and pulled her away from Kira's body. The knife fell to the floor with a clang. Eveina did not resist. She stood breathing heavily and looked at the motionless body of the bride. Her hands were covered in blood up to her elbows. Drops of blood covered her face and dress. Ruth and Tiana rushed to Kira. Ruth knelt down next to her daughter, lifted her head, and pressed it to her chest. "Kira, my daughter, open your eyes, please." But Kira did not respond. Her body was motionless, her eyes open and staring into space. Her chest did not rise. She was not breathing. Tiana checked her pulse with trembling fingers. Then she slowly shook her head and a stifled moan escaped her throat. She's dead. Ruth sobbed so hard that it seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Jerome knelt down beside her, hugging his wife and daughter. Darius stood in the middle of the altar, looking at the bride's body. His arms hung limply at his sides, his face waxy. He did not cry. He just stood there, unable to move, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Eveina stood between two men who were holding her by the arms. Her face was calm, almost peaceful. She looked at Kira's body and said quietly, "Now justice has been restored." The priest stood at the altar, crossing himself with trembling hands. His lips whispered a prayer, but his voice broke. "Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy on the soul of your servant. Accept her into your kingdom." Or the guests cried, hugged each other, and some ran out of the church. Someone had already called the police. Sirens could be heard in the distance, getting closer. Eveina did not resist as the men continued to hold her. She just stood and looked at Kira, at the blood spreading across her white dress, at the motionless body, at the shattered dream of happiness. "She paid for her sin," Eveina repeated quietly. "She paid." Darius knelt down next to Kira's body. His hands trembled as he gently touched her face. Tears finally streamed from his eyes, and he leaned over, pressing his forehead against hers. The sirens grew louder. A few moments later, police officers burst into the church. But it was